Thank you, Kiran. And thank you to all of you. One couldn't ask for a better launch of Chapal Rani, the last queen of Bengal, than this stage. And I think Chapal Rani would be very, very happy. So I'll hand it over to you, Georgina. Shall we play? Will you
I think we have a video. Maybe we can play that now.
সম্পূর্ণ চপল রানী, আমি কিন্তু চপল ভাদুরী নই।
চিনি, আমি মহাশিবের সমিত্রকে চিনি, কিন্তু আপনি চেনেন না মহারানী মহাসতী কৈকেয়ীকে। আপনি করেছেন নির্জন গিরি গুহায় বসে ভগবানের আরাধনা, আর আমি করেছি কর্মব্যস্ত সংসারে বসে আমার স্বামীর চরণ বন্দনা।
আর আমার কোনো দুঃখ নেই, তবে হ্যাঁ শেষ কটা দিন মায়ের কৃপায় চলে গেলেই হলো আর কি। হেসে এরকম ভাবে হেসে হেসেই চলে যেতে পারলেই পারছি, আর কি বলবো।
কত কবরখানা এটা তুমি বানিয়েছ আজকাল, বিহার থেকে উড়িষ্যা, উড়িষ্যা থেকে বাংলা, ধ্বংসের বীজ ছড়াতে ছড়াতে এসেছ। পেছনে রচনা করে এসেছ কত দিগন্ত বিস্তৃত কবরখানা, কিন্তু একটা ফুলের বাগান তো তুমি রচনা করতে পারো নি। তুমি যখন মরবে তোমার কবরের ওপর শেয়াল সব মরবে, একটা মানুষও তখন চোখের জল ফেলবে না। মানে আমি যখন প্রথম যাত্রাদলে যাই চপল বাহাদুরি, কিন্তু যাত্রাদলে গিয়ে আমার নাম দিত পোস্টারে চপল রানী। আমার খুব বিরক্ত লাগতো যে ব্যাটা ছেলের নামের সঙ্গে মেয়ে ছেলের নাম মিশে যাবে কেন। হ্যাঁ, অথচ এইটা করেই কিন্তু আমার জীবিকা নির্বাহ করেছি আমি, এখনো করছি, এই আপনাদের সামনেও বলছি।
He lived to see the book.
He's still around. I took a copy for him right before I came, the advance proof. And that video was actually taken a few weeks ago. He's bedridden now. But he was, as soon as I said I was coming to Jaipur, he was like, oh, I went to Jaipur, you know, all those pink buildings, I wish I could come. I really wish he could come here. He would be so thrilled.
Well, and he'd be just, delighted that all of you are here. So tell us, who is he?
Chapal Bhaduri is one of the, at a time when Bengal folk theatre, men played the part of women, because at that time it was not regarded as, folk theatre would travel all over the state and it was not regarded as safe for women to travel. The other issue was at that time there were no microphones. So there were 10,000 people might show up in a field And so the actor's voice had to carry. So men played the parts of women, and because these men were known as Ranis or queens, because they played the parts of queens and goddesses and all of that on stage. Chapal Rani was one of the last. He started when he was in 1958 or so, when he was still a teenager or just beyond his teens. And by then, women started coming into Jatra, and suddenly, in the 1970s, he found himself without a profession. There was no need for somebody like Chapal Rani, and he ended up on the streets playing a goddess. There's scenes we saw where he was dressing up as a goddess. He would play the goddess for smallpox on the streets of Calcutta and earn 10 rupees, 20 rupees, 50 rupees. Later on, Naveen Kishore of Seagull Books documented that and created a set of black and white photographs. Those gave him a new lease of life. There was a documentary, then suddenly films were made featuring him, and he became a kind of queer icon. But the interesting thing at the time when he lived, when he was like and he had a relationship with a man and he was open about it, but he had no idea what LGBT and all of that meant. He was just, I'm just Chapal Rani.
Tell me about your relationship with him.
My relationship, it's not, this is Jatra, is not something I was that interested in him. And when I met him, he was like this elderly man in a kurta. You would not look at him and think that this man could transform into a queen on stage. And but when people I talked to said that was the magical thing. In person, he was an effeminate man, but with a square face, as you could see. Not someone you'd look at and think like, oh, this looks like a woman. But as soon as he puts on his makeup and he does his eyes, and he would say, the lips are the last thing I do. Once I do the lips, not even the bra or anything. Once I do the lips, I'm a woman. And directors who worked with him said, before it, they would be like laughing and joking like one of the boys. But as soon as he put on the lips and drew that third eye, they said all the men would keep their distance from him as if this was now a woman. And then at the end of it, he would just take it all off and become another elderly man in a pajama and a kurta, and you could imagine him out in the market, with a bag doing shopping for fish.
You let him speak mostly in his own voice, and I wonder how you found him and how those conversations started and why the story was almost lost.
I found him through Seagull Books because Seagull had done this photography exhibition, and Naveen Kishore of Seagull Books had done a documentary of him. And that had sort of rediscovered him to a whole new audience, which was not into Jatra or folk theatre, but they were interested in this process of transformation. And Chapal Rani was always very grateful for that. There have been many profiles of him written mostly in Bengali, some also English papers. But he had always said that if he ever had a biography written, he would want Seagull to do it as this press. And so at one point, Naveen Kishore approached me and said, would you do it? And Bishan Samaddar was heading the Pride list for them, and it seemed like a good fit. And he would come every week. He lives in an old age home now, alone. And every week he would come to the Seagull bookstore, and he would sit there, he would have his cup of tea, and then we would talk for hours till it was time for him to go back for lunch. And he would sit there and look at all the books around him and say, I can't believe it, I just had an education up to the 8th grade. And here I am surrounded by all these books. And that's why I ended that clip with him when I showed him the book. He said, 500 pages? Baba, I mean, he couldn't imagine that someone could write a 500-page book. And I'm like, Chapalda, you've lived into your 80. You've been working for over 50 years, 70. He started in his teens, in his 80s. So even 500 pages is not a lot. And we were thankful to be able to include photographs from his days. Though, sadly, some of the photographs from his heyday as a performer are lost because when he broke up with his long-term relationship with a man, one of the casualties was the photographs. The man didn't give back his photographs. So every time I would interview him, at some point he would say, yes, but you should have seen me when I was 21. That's like his endless wistfulness. So I just had to imagine him in the 21. I actually asked AI, Grok, like I gave the current picture and said, imagine this person 30 years younger. And the AI still isn't good enough. They couldn't do justice.
At least Grok left his clothes on, right?
Yeah.
There's clearly huge glamour here. Is there also, do you think, loneliness?
Immensely. He once told me very movingly, that he acted in order not to be lonely. As an effeminate, he's very cheery, but as an effeminate boy growing up in the 1950s, coming of age in the 1950s, he obviously faced ridicule, and in a way, this theater saved him because it gave him a platform. It gave him a space where he could be Chapal Rani and respected, and he could earn money as opposed to somebody who was always teased or bullied or ridiculed. So it saved him. And then when he lost it, I think when he lost the profession, when he had nowhere, so it ends really, his professional career ends in the 1970s. He's playing a sort of a mother-in-law type character on stage. And he would play a lot of these older women because the new actresses coming into Jatra, they would play the young heroine. And he would play the queen mother or whatever. And he was on stage and someone, the little clay cups in which you drink tea, someone threw it at him. And for a minute, he didn't know what was going on. And then he was like, what is the problem? And then suddenly he realized, I am the problem. They're like, we want to see a real woman. We don't want to see you. And then he breaks up with the relation. He's been with a man had a relationship with a man and who was himself married. And he lived in the same house with the man and his wife and family. And he was sort of their housekeeper almost. And that relationship ends. And, now he's in an old age home and he's cheery, but I think that recently because he had a stroke and is bedridden, that has made him feel lonelier. His family, he has nieces who sort of look after him, but his immediate family is all gone. So there's a lot of loneliness. And he said, I was okay being alone. I wasn't ready for the loneliness.
He's a Rani or a queen, importantly not trans, and you're very clear about not retrofitting modern labels onto him or his situation. Why was that important to you as a writer? You don't say she, for instance.
I don't say she because, so I think that was my learning from the process, whereas a gay man who has come of age in a time of Section 377. I've seen it there. I've seen Section 377 go, the law that criminalized homosexuality in India. So and then I lived in the US and I marched in pride parades in San Francisco, where it's so much about identity. What are you, gay, cisgender, all of these. And then I suddenly encountered this person who was all of these, but without any of the labels. The labels didn't mean anything to him. I asked him, did you know? He didn't even know the word gay, even though he was in relationship with a man. He just knew, I sometimes say he was sort of a romantic sexual, as in his sexuality was about the romance with this person, as opposed to any box to identify him. And so, the more I talked to him, the more I would feel protective about him because I felt like I needed to protect his story from the desire around us right now in identity politics to put people in boxes that they can't get out of. And he was beyond those boxes, and sometimes he would say things, and I'm like, oh my God, he's going to get cancelled if he says stuff like this out in the open. But he doesn't care. I mean, he's really one of a kind. They broke the mold after they made him.
I love the way you depict the city of Calcutta. It's almost a character in the book. And I wonder what Chapal's story tells us about the life of that city, the cultural life, really, of the city in the mid-20th century.
I think it is indeed, Georgina, a story of Calcutta, a lost Calcutta. Even as Chapal is the last of a profession that's lost, he is fading. The Calcutta he lived in is also fading away. So this is a time when theatre was huge in North Calcutta. It was bustling. His mother was a very famous actor of that time. His uncle, Shishir Bhaduri, was regarded as one of the doyens of Bengali theatre. But the mother, as an actress, very famous, but all her life she had to face questions of whether she came from as an actress. Did you come from the red light district? Were you actually a prostitute? Chapal and his siblings were often not recognized, where people would say, well, they're actually, because the mother, what is remarkable to me is the mother had a relationship with another man before, had 3 children by them, then ends up in a relationship with this man who becomes Chapal's father, has 3 more children, brings all her children, 3, into one house. They live together, and she buys her own house. Back in the 1950s, with her earnings, she buys her house. The man who becomes her husband lives in the house, but it is Prabha Devi's house, which is, I think, a remarkable achievement for a man, for something of that time. And I think Chapal is extremely proud of being the son of Prabha Devi, much more than he's of his father.
You've written and spoken and broadcast about queer South Asian life for decades now. Was there something about working on this that felt, I don't know, different or progressive in some way?
Actually, it was a moment of some shame for me, because I used to edit a magazine called Trikone, which is the oldest South Asian LGBTQ magazine, came out of California. And at that time, there were such few instances of queer visibility in South Asian things. We would, if Vikram Seth's Suitable Boy had a queer gay character on page 237, we would make an article about that, because there wasn't that much visible out there. But Chapal Rani was around at that time, and I never featured him in the magazine. He existed because he came from this world of Bengali folk theatre. He didn't exist in my sort of English-speaking cosmopolitan world. And I think, in a way, this book is sort of my apology.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely.
Thank you.
Do you think that if Chapal Rani was performing today, in this world of drag artists, drag fame, of trans, of online influencers and so on, what do you think would be different?
I think the biggest thing to remember is I didn't know what to label Chapal Rani, because he is, in today's world, people would say, oh, is he a drag queen? And I would say no. Because a drag queen, there is an element of camp, that you're performing female. Chapal Rani's USP was, there was no camp. He had to project femininity as a real thing. The audience there had to believe that this was a real queen, a real goddess, a woman on stage, not a man playing a woman. And later in life, when the films and all are made, the films are invariably about a character like Chapal Rani, a man who played women on stage. But as long as he was in Jatra, he said, for one moment, the audience, you couldn't break that illusion. There was a compact between the audience and the performer that we will all buy into this illusion right now, that this is a woman on stage. And if that illusion shattered, he would say the whole thing would fall apart.
How has writing this book changed you?
As I said, it's made me humbler in a way, because I also realize, I think as queer people, now with young people, you always think the story begins with you. And there was not much queer visibility in India, and I would say, Trikone was the first South Asian LGBTQ magazine. It started, I think, in 1986. And here was this man, leading a life with another man, refusing to get married. Many other queens of these impersonators got married, but he refused to get married. He led this life in the 50s with his head held high. And he would say, people would say, oh, are you a homo? And he would say, that was the one word he learned. He said, yes, but you know, show me another person who can get up on stage and play the Empress Noor Jahan like I do. So it made me much humbler, and it also made me realize how much I didn't know about my own queer history, whose footsteps I walk in. And that's why in the book, in addition to Chapal's story, I have fictional interludes that are about the characters from that time, telling that same story to fill in these many gaps that I feel like exist around us.
And finally, Sandip, what do you hope that people take away from this book?
I hope they take away a tolerance for difference. I think this world is getting more and more homogenized. And even in queer worlds, there is a right way to be, and you know, there's a wrong way to be. And are you saying the right things or not? You judge by what you say. And I hope when people read the story, they realize that this is what it means to live outside the box, and that it is possible to have a life that is outside the box and laugh and love on your own terms. And it doesn't mean this is not like he's not Chapal Rani, he's not Saint Chapal. And that's why some of the interludes are about how women coming in viewed artists like that. And they were resentful. They're like, you know, the women would come into Jatra and be told, yeah, you were fine, but you were not like Chapal Rani. And I think it really pissed people off when they would hear that. But so I tell those stories also to say, life is complicated, and that's okay. And I just wish, I mean, looking at him at the old age home, I realized with all my privilege as a gay person, with English language, you know, with gay friends and all of it, sometimes I don't know if I see a mirror image of myself. I think that fear of loneliness is universal. It cuts across to all of us. And every time I go to his old age home, and then when I leave, I say goodbye. And he says, I don't know if I'll be here next time. And I say, of course you will be. But in my heart, I sometimes want, and I end the introduction by saying that he has a big mirror. He doesn't keep a mirror in the room anymore. He says, I don't need a mirror. What will I look at? I'm an old man with balding, you know, thinning hair. He has a mirror outside the room. And when I say goodbye, I look in the mirror and I see myself.
Sandy, that's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for allowing us to share the birth of your book.
Thank you so much, Georgina.
And for sharing this wonderful story. Whatever happens, you have kept Chapal Rani alive.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you, and thank you to JLF for hosting this.